Hey, good morning, everyone. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Garry. I'm one of the pastors here. Welcome to the meeting place, and thanks for tuning in this morning, wherever it is you're tuning in from. Just for fun, if you're on the chat room, just let the host know maybe what room you're tuning in from, what city, what province, what country, just to have some fun. I encourage you to do that. And don't forget, send those pictures in. We say this every week, but it really does encourage everyone as we, during the pre-service roll before the live stream goes live, we have a bunch of pictures rolling by of people that maybe you haven't seen since this whole thing started. You can send it to the address on the screen, and I'd encourage you to do that. So, a couple of weeks ago, my wife and I did something that we thought we would never, ever do again. We bought a puppy. There she is there, little standard poodle, name's Lexi. It's made for an interesting couple of weeks, to be sure, as we've, gone from being empty nesters, our kids are all out married and all that type of stuff, to having this furry bundle of energy ripping around the house. And if you've ever had a puppy, you know this to be true. The one thing you can never, ever, ever do with a puppy in the house is leave them alone, even for a second, because if you do, one of two things is going to happen. One, they're going to chew on something, like a shoe, chair leg, something like that, or they're going to leave you a present to step in, right? Just the other morning, Thursday actually, I was about to make breakfast, so I was walking into the kitchen, and I walked around the corner, and there it was, in the middle of the floor. A nice present just waiting for me, and it wasn't the liquid kind, okay? Yeah. I remember thinking to myself, really, dog? You were just out. Like, how can this be happening? And so, now, luckily, we have hardwood floors. Much easier to clean up than carpets. So I went and grabbed some toilet paper and kind of picked up that warm mess, and then I went and grabbed what has to be like the best invention known to man. It's the Swiffer Wet Jet. If you got a puppy, man, you have to have one of these things. They're awesome. And as I was cleaning, I was kind of mopping the floor. I thought to myself, why did we do this? Like, what were we thinking? Why did we get a dog? This is crazy. But here's the thing. As I was thinking that, it was almost like I answered myself, but I was speaking to my wife. I said, you know what? With all that negative thought going through my head, I said, well, you know what, honey? The one positive thing about getting a puppy is our floors are as clean as they've ever been. It's all a matter of perspective, isn't it? Which is what this series is all about. It's exploring what the Bible has to teach us, you and me, about how we can stay positive and hopeful in a world that seems to have just lost its mind. And so over the past couple of weeks, we looked at a couple of ideas, mainly that what we think about the most, what we regularly expose our minds to, impacts our perspective, and whether that's skewed towards the negative or the positive. And last week, we looked at how our attitude is the same thing. It helps define and shape our perspective, especially when we're facing the future with either fear or faith. And if you've missed any of those messages, you can catch up online or on our app, and I would encourage you to do that. But this week, we're going to wrap up our series exploring this idea, that what we fix our eyes on is key to remaining positive and hopeful in a seemingly negative and hopeless world. I don't know if you remember this or if you even have your driver's license, but do you remember when you got your driver's license? Or maybe for you it was when you learned how to ride a bicycle, and your driving instructor or your parent or whoever taught you to ride a bike, what's the one thing that they all said to you when you learned that? It was, watch where you're going, right? They said to make sure you look where you want to go. Don't look down at the road. Don't look at the road. Look down the road to where you want to end up. And that's why they say it, because we will end up at the very place we're looking. For example, if you're driving down the road and there's a big ditch beside you and you don't want to go into the ditch, Don't look at the ditch, because that's where you'll end up. Potholes, same thing. If you're driving down the road and you see a pothole and you're trying to avoid it, if you stare at the pothole, you're going to hit the pothole. I've done it on my bike. I've seen something in the middle of the road and say, oh man, I sure don't want to hit that. And next thing you know, I'm driving over top of it. It's called, there's a name for it, it's called target fixation, and it's a real thing. I mean, check this out. This is it in full motion. We're going to see a picture of a biker who's filming his buddy's riding, and the bike in front loses control and crashes. And watch what happens to the driver that's filming it. Boom, he drives right into him. Why? Because he's being impacted by target fixation. He's looking at the very thing that he doesn't want to hit. You have to be careful where you're looking, because ultimately that's where you're going to end up. It's interesting. I was putting this talk together and I was thinking about this whole target fixation thing, and I couldn't help but see how this whole principle actually applies to everyday life. Here's what I mean. For years, my wife and I lived in a neighborhood that it seemed like every other house had an RCMP officer living in it. In fact, the house we lived in, we had a police officer on either side of us. And so over the years, we got to know them really well. And I remember asking them this question. I was like, what is the hardest thing about being a cop? And, I said, like, is it that, you make friends and all of a sudden you get transferred and you got to move somewhere else, make new friends? And they said, no, that's hard. But here's what they said. And this is at two separate times that they said this. They said, the hardest thing about being a cop is how easy it is to lose hope in humanity, because every day we are exposed to seeing the bad side of people. It's all we see. What we look at regularly will influence our perspective. And so if you spend more time and energy focused on positive things that are positive in nature, chances are you're going to have a more optimistic, positive perspective about life and the future. And on the other hand, if you're exposing your eyes to things that are negative in nature, chances are you're going to have a more pessimistic view of life in the future. Just to kind of drive the point home here, I read a study, while I was putting this all together. It's done way back in 1997. So this is before social media was really a thing. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to do a study on the effects negative news had on people. And so what they did, the researchers had gathered a whole bunch of people and they divided them into 3 groups. And each group was to watch a 14-minute newsreel that the researchers had put together. In the first group, they had to watch 14 minutes of newsreel that was all negative news. It was all bad news. The second group, it was all positive news, 14 minutes of positive news. The third group got a little bit of both. So the researchers called it neutral news. So they get a good news story and then a not so good news story, and it kind of balanced out. Well, not surprisingly, those who watched the negative news reported being significantly more anxious and worrisome. Okay, no surprise there. What was interesting was this, that those that watched the negative news thought about and focused on their worries far more than those who watched the positive news or the neutral news. It was at the top of their mind all the time. It's all they could see. And so the question I'm just going to throw out there for you, you don't have to answer it right now, but it's a good question to think about. And here's the question: what are you regularly fixing your eyes on? What are you regularly fixing your eyes on? Just kind of roll that question around. Now, I know target fixation, it's a relatively new term, but here's the thing. The principle of target fixation, although we use it to talk about driving and what we're aiming for, this principle's been around for thousands of years. In fact, the Bible is actually full of stories of people experiencing the principle of target fixation. And so I'm going to share with you this morning 2 stories from the Old Testament in the Bible about people who are impacted by this whole principle of target fixation. So the first story takes place, there's a bunch of people called the Israelites. They're in Egypt, and they're under oppression. They're under slavery to one of the most brutal nations on the earth at the time, the Egyptians. And they just want to get out of there. And so they're crying out to God, save us, save us, save us. And God comes along, and he gets them out of there in this most spectacular fashion. It's the whole story of the Red Sea. You know, they head out of town, and all of a sudden the Egyptians are like, what did we do? We just got rid of our workforce. We got to go get these guys. So they go to chase them. The Israelites can't go anywhere because the Red Sea's in front of them, and they're like, oh, we're all going to die. But God parts the Red Sea. They all get through. The Egyptian army goes in after them. Water covers over. They all drown. Now the Egyptians are safe, but they're in the desert. This harsh land that's hardly has any food or very little water. And so very shortly after being there, they start to whine. It's like, oh, we'd be better off back in Egypt. Why are we here? But God shows up, and he provides for them. And he gives them food and water and protection, and he guides them through the desert. And after about a year of traveling through the desert, Moses, their leader, he's the guy with the 10 Commandments, remember him, Charlton Heston and all that? That's Moses. He and the Israelites finally arrive at the edge of the desert, on the border of this land that is actually referred to as a land flowing with milk and honey. It's so rich in natural resources, and it's fantastic. And so they get there, and it's their land. God's promised it to them. Here's the problem. There's people living there. There's people occupying this land. And so before they go in, Moses says, hey, we better figure out what we're up against here. So I'm going to send some spies in there to do some work and gather intel. And so he gathers 12 men together, and he says, okay, guys, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go in, kind of gather intel, and come back and report to us what we're up against. So these 12 men head off. And for 40 days, they kind of scope out the land, secretly moving around. And here's the thing. While they're there, they all saw the same land, the same geography. They saw this land that was flowing with milk and honey. They all saw the same enemy. Or did they? Check this out. 40 days passes. The 12 come back. And here's what 10 of them had to say. So Moses is there. They got all the Israelites hanging around. And here's what 10 of them reported. They said, we entered the land that you sent us to explore. And it is indeed a bountiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey. But the people living there are powerful. And their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there. We can't go up against them. They are stronger than we are. Okay, here's what the other 2 men, named Joshua and Caleb, remember, they were on the same mission, saw the exact same things. Here's what they said. We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. Okay, so hold that. That's the first story. Here's the second story. Second story, again from the Old Testament, it involves hundreds of Israelite soldiers who are standing along the border between Israel and Palestine. 2 enemies, they don't like each other, so they're kind of guarding their border. And they're standing there, and the Palestinians, they have this giant of a man. You've probably heard this story. His name is Goliath. Some reports say he was 9 feet tall, carried a big spear and a shield, and twice a day, in the morning and at night, he would come out, and he would challenge the Israeli army. He'd call them down, a bunch of wimps. They're like, come on, let's go. And he'd throw this challenge out. He would say to them, choose a man and have him come down to me. And if he is able to fight me and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. It's like the old macho chant, right? Fight to the death kind of thing, right? And then Goliath said, this day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. And check out what happens. On hearing Goliath's words, Saul, who's the king at the time, and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. The soldiers saw this giant of a man and were intimidated, horrified, terrified. But then along comes a young man, about 15 years old, somewhere in there, named David. As he arrives on the scene, Goliath is stepping out for his morning tirade, against the Israelites, and he starts to let fly with all his insults and his taunts, like, come on, let's throw it down, like, bring it on, I'm ready for you. And here's what happened. As he's doing that, the men began to run away in fright. And then, as if to justify their fears, they look at David and say, hey, have you seen the giant? Because if you had, you'd be running too. I love David's response. A few verses later, David says this, don't worry about this Philistine. I'll go fight him. Interesting. David and the men all saw the same enemy, but their perspectives were completely different. You could put it this way. The soldier saw Goliath and in essence said, he's too big for us to hit. David looked at him and said, he's too big to miss. Right? It's all a matter of perspective. What are you focusing on? And we see that same dynamic play out in the first story. In the first story, the 12 men that went into the promised land all saw the same thing, the same daunting enemy. 10 said, no way, can't be done. 2 of them said, it can be done. So the question that comes up for me anyway is how? Like, how is it possible for people that are in the same situation, looking at the same thing, come to such differing perspectives? I would suggest it's target fixation. Listen as I read what Joshua, Caleb, and David said to the people who were afraid, even though they were looking at the same enemy. Joshua and Caleb said, hey guys, we have no reason to be afraid of the people who live there. The Lord is on our side, and they won't stand a chance against us. David said this, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear. It's a really cool story. David was out watching some sheep, and one time a bear came out, and another time a lion came out, and he ripped them apart with his bare hands. Cool, really cool story. He says, that same Lord will also be faithful to deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. These men, all these men in these 2 stories were experiencing the same thing, target fixation. What differed was what they were focused on. Most of the men in these stories were fixated most on the thing that threatened them, and what happened? They ended up in the place where they didn't want to be, a place where they were full of fear and worry. Joshua, Caleb, and David had their eyes fixed not on the enemy, not on the proverbial ditch or pothole. They had their eyes focused on God. And they ended up experiencing God's peace because they trusted his promises to help them and be with them no matter what. And here's a cool thing in this. Those same promises are true for you and for me today. God promises to be with us, that he won't abandon us, no matter what we're facing. Listen to these words found in a letter written to some first century Christians. I love these words. It says, since God assured us, I'll never let you down, I'll never walk off and leave you, we can boldly quote, God is there ready to help. I'm fearless no matter what. Who or what can get to me? Beautiful words. You know, if you and I are going to have any chance of staying positive and hopeful in this world, so we can be those beacons of hope as Jesus calls us to be, to take his light into this dark world, We have to take our eyes off that which we fear the most and instead fix our eyes on those things that are good, and more importantly, who is good, and that is God. I love these words from an old hymn written back, I think it was 1922, that really sum up what we've been talking about today and for the past couple of weeks. Listen to these words. Listen to these lyrics. They start with a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask them. I'm going to ask them to you. O soul, are you wearied and troubled? Are you? Are you troubled with what's going on in the world, your life, your job, your health? No light in the darkness you see? Is whatever you're facing so big that you can't see through it or around it? Oh, there's light for a look at the Savior and life more abundant and free. And this is how. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. And the things of this earth, all the concerns, all the worries, all the fears will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. What a beautiful strategy, beautiful words to meditate on, to help us to remain positive and hopeful in a negative world. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. You know, I don't know where you are at with all of that, especially with all the uncertainties that you may be facing in light of the world's current situation. But maybe for you, you've been tuning in for a while, and you've been listening week after week, and you're hearing stories of how much God loves you, and that he can't love you any more or any more less than he loves you right now, regardless of what you've done, haven't done, or what's been done to you. And maybe you've heard in the songs that we sing, it just reaffirms who God is, that he is with us, even when circumstances will scream otherwise. Maybe you've heard that, and you're at the place where you think, I want God in my life. You want to take that step and respond to his offer of love and forgiveness and mercy and grace. And if you are, that's awesome. I'm going to pray a prayer at the end that I would invite you to pray with me. But maybe you're here and you're thinking, I'm just not sure yet. I'm not sure yet. You know what? That's okay too. I just want you to know that we have an awesome online team. Some awesome people that would love to chat with you if you have questions. Because maybe you do, and that's okay. You just simply need to press the prayer button, and you'll be taken into a private, confidential chat room where you can design that conversation to go any way you want. It could be through just texting. It could be you swap phone numbers, emails, whatever it happens to be. And just ask your questions. And they'll do their best to answer it, and if not, they will point you in the direction to get those answers. But wherever you find yourself this morning in relationship to God, I'm going to invite you to pray this simple prayer. And maybe for the first time, kick into action a new relationship with God, or maybe rekindle an old relationship with God that's kind of been pushed off to the side because life gets busy. Wherever you find yourself, I just invite you to quiet your mind and pray this prayer. And thank you for the honor and the privilege it is to walk with you on this journey. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for giving me life. Thank you for loving me. Even when I've ignored you and gone my own way. I realize that I need you in my life. And I am sorry for my sin and my selfishness. And right here, right now, I accept your grace and forgiveness. I don't understand it all, but I thank you for dying on the cross for me. Help me to understand it more. And as much as I know how, I will follow you. Come into my life. Make me new inside. And help me to grow in my love for you, myself, and others. Amen.